All right. Hello, everybody. How's it going today? So, last time I was streaming, we were working on this publish toggle to allow you to either have a concert thinking about something else. Either have a product that's published or unpublished. So I have this kind of sort of UI interaction working now. So if we go over to products here, if we were to go and make one of these products unpublished, say like JMax getting Git course. So if we made this have no published at date, and check this out, you'd see draft, and then you'd have the option to publish, or if you're in the other situation where it's already published, then you have the option to unpublish. But clicking these doesn't actually do anything at all yet. So the thing that I wanted to work on and talk a bit about today was driving out this actual action and what that looks like on the server side. So let's think about a couple ways that you could do this. I'll just kind of sketch them out. So that's going to need to be some sort of AJAX request that we make to our server to change the state. So there's sort of three ways I can think of to do it. Option one is to do something like a post request to products/ID /publish, right? Have like a publish action exposed as an endpoint. And this is a really common solution that I see to this sort of thing. So if we look at our products controller, right now we have like index, store, edit, update. So we would just add another action down here called publish, and it would probably take an ID, and that's where we'd kind of just do whatever work was necessary to publish this concert. Or I keep saying concert because I'm thinking about my testing course, but product. So that's one option. I don't like this option a lot because I find it really valuable to try and stick to like the resourceful or RESTful actions, right? So like index, show, create, store, edit, update, and delete. These are what you get if you just do something like route resource in Laravel, right? And they're also like your kind of standard REST actions. And I find by trying to stick to this convention, sometimes it inspires like some more interesting solutions to things. So like publish is of course not a RESTful action. So we would have to deviate from this convention and add like a new action. And the reason I don't like this is because it ends up opening up the doors to basically making everything a free-for-all and letting you do whatever you want. Maybe you add an unpublish action. Maybe there's a subscribe action. Like there's all sorts of actions that you could make methods on your controller, but then you end up with these giant controllers with tons of methods where a lot of the time multiple actions in that controller don't have anything to do with each other. They don't share the same dependencies because they're doing totally different things. And it can lead you to just having these big controllers that do a little bit too much and are kind of hard to manage. So I don't really like that option. Another option is to, if we're trying to force ourselves to stick to the RESTful actions, then the one that you might like kind of naturally think of here is like update, right? Maybe we're updating the published at timestamp on the concert or on the product. So if you look at our database, we have this published at timestamp, and that's kind of what determines if it's published or not. So maybe what you would do is you would make like a patch request to products/ID to update it. And we might just send through some JSON or something that looks like published true, just saying like, yeah, this should be published now because we're trying to change that. And whether that's represented as a date or a timestamp on the back end doesn't really matter. You could pass through the timestamp even if you want it from the front end, but I think that's kind of exposing a little too much implementation detail personally. The thing that I don't love about this approach is that in our user interface, the act of updating the product, which is all these fields here, and the act of publishing the product are two totally different steps. So in the controller, we'd basically have to piggyback off of our update action, right? Because we already have an update action for updating stuff related to the product. And in this case, it's not even a JSON thing. This is like a real update action that does a redirect. So you've already got that sort of weird kind of clashing decision there, where this wants to return HTML and we were planning to do the other one as an AJAX request. But here you have all this update stuff, right, that goes through and updates all these fields. And now if we were going to piggyback off of this and allow publishing in the same controller, you'd end up basically having to check for the presence of that field, because when we click publish, we're not going to pass through a new name or a new description or a new price or anything like that, right? So you'd want to basically make sure you didn't accidentally update those fields with null or something like that. So you'd end up having to do something sort of gnarly, like basically filtering out any keys that weren't present in the request and only updating the ones that were. It just kind of like makes it unnecessarily complicated. And it's sort of confusing again, because you have this path that always sends all these attributes, and this path that only sends published equals true. And you have one method that sort of has to try and like figure out what was your intention and then like take the right code path. So that seems like unnecessarily complicated to me. So the third option, which is the one that I think is the most interesting, and what I was talking about on Twitter when I was talking about creating more controllers and why I think it can be a valuable thing to try, is to look back at these REST actions again and think, are there any other ones that we could kind of use here to represent publishing a product? It's not index or show. It's not going to be edit, update, or delete, but it could be maybe store. What could we be doing? Like, what could we be storing? What are we creating? Well, like if you have a product that's unpublished, like a draft product, and then you publish that product, what you have now is a published product, and you didn't have a published product before. So you can sort of think of it as creating a new published product. So imagine we had a request that looked like this, a post request to published products. And all we did was pass through the product ID of the product that we're trying to publish. And think about like what are kind of the implications of this in our code, right? So there's no such thing as like a published product model or a published product table or anything, but there's nothing stopping us from having this published products resource. Now, if we have this published products resource, maybe what we end up doing is we end up creating a controller for that, a brand new controller. So instead of piggybacking off the existing products controller, we can have a whole new controller just for dealing with published products. And we'd have a store function here that doesn't take anything. But then basically in here, what we do is we say something like product equals product, find request product ID, essentially, right? It'd be a little bit more complicated than this with authorization and scoping and stuff. But then we would do something like, product publish. And then we would just like return, some details about the product or something, maybe if we're returning like the JSON. Yeah, this is definitely similar to some lessons that I posted in the testing course earlier today. So I want to walk through kind of applying the same idea here and showing you kind of like what it looks like and how it turns out. So let's create a brand new test for this. Let's over our test file in our feature makers folder. We'll make a new file called publishProductTest.php. And we'll scaffold out a test case here. And we'll pull in our database migrations. And we'll create a new test. So let's think about what we're going to call it. But basically, I want to be able to like drive out this template, right? So our goal is to get it so that I can go to this thing, click publish, have this probably do some little loading action, and then be published. But we're going to drive out the back end first and then jump back to the front end and wire it all up and make it kind of look cool. So let's think. We'll call it something like, what do we call some of these other tests? So adding a new product. So let's just call it publishing a product. I think it needs to be a little bit more specific than this. I'm using the term maker to represent the people who are putting stuff up for sale here. So why don't we say something like a maker can publish their own product. And we have to make sure that it's publishable. I think I have a model factory for that. So I implemented some stuff in between the last stream and today, where if you look at a product, it has this is publishable method, which basically just like makes sure that because of the way I've set this thing up, every column in the database almost is nullable. So you can have a product that has no price or no description or no image because we don't really care if it's fully filled out while it's still a draft. But we do want those fields to be there for sure by the time you go to publish. So I have this method to check if it's publishable. So if we look at our model factory and look at product, you can see I have product and then I have publishable product. So we want to make sure that a publishable product can be published and an unpublishable product cannot be published. So let's do something like user equals factory user class create. We'll import this user, and then we'll say product equals factory product class. Did I make a product factory? Yeah, create published. I think we'll leave that as is. States publishable. Create. Okay, so now that we have a publishable product, we want to make like a request to publish it, right? So this is like we were talking about before. It's going to be a post request, and it'll be a post JSON request to some endpoint, which in this case, I think it's just going to be /published products. And we're going to pass through a product ID of product ID. And then we got to decide what we want to basically happen. Let's look at some HTTP status codes. So I wonder if it should be created. I think it probably should be, even though we're not actually creating a new resource. Is there an assert okay? No. Assert response okay? No. Let's look at the test response class. Assert successful. All right, let's just do assert successful because I'm not too picky really about what we return. Like we'll just probably do a 200, but we'll have to think about it going forward. And then we want to basically make sure that the product is published, right? So let's assert true. Product fresh is published. And that should be kind of enough to start. Yeah, unable to locate factory. I always make this mistake of forgetting to import things. Okay, so not found HTTP exception. So we don't have a route for this. So let's add a post request down here to published products. And we'll have that point at our published products controller's store method, which doesn't exist yet. Okay, so there is no controller. So artisan make controller published products controller. Run the test again. Probably no store method. Okay, so let's go to the published products controller. Add the store method. Run the test. Failed asserting that false is true. Okay. So product equals product find request product ID. I'm kind of being intentionally naive about the implementation until I have other tests. Like we're going to want to scope this to the current user, but Because I don't have a test forcing that, I'm not going to build that implementation in yet. Then we basically want to say product publish, although I'm not convinced I have a publish method. No, I don't. But that's fine. We'll use this test to kind of drive that out. So we write the code we wish we had. And then we can say, I guess since this is just like a JSON thing, I'm pretty happy to just return the product. You could do some clever shit with tap here. Like you could do something like return tap that function product. That's like the same thing. We won't do it because we know this code's actually going to get a little bit more complicated, but we'll leave that like that for now. And let's see what we get. No product class, so let's import that, although we probably won't need that long term. No publish method. So there's two paths you could take here. We could decide that this error is sufficient in terms of convincing us that we need to create a publish method, or we could use it as an opportunity to write a unit test for the product class. So I think we already have a thing to check if a product is published, complete product is publishable. I have a bunch of tests for basically checking if something's published. So this is a kind of like the inner TDD loop right now. So if you Google BDD loop, sometimes you'll see this this picture. I've used this in a presentation before too. So the idea of kind of outside in TDD, which is the way that I always drive out new stuff, is that you start by writing like a failing end-to-end test or a failing feature test, right? And then that test fails, and you work on trying to get that test to pass. And sometimes as part of trying to get that test to pass, you need to write a new unit test and get into this loop of getting some smaller, lower level functionality working, and then working on this again. There might actually be a better image that shows this better. If I search outside in TDD loop. And no, they're all basically the same. But yeah, basically we're entering this inner TDD loop right now. So the feature test is going to remain failing while we work on the unit test, and the unit test will help us get the feature test passing. So let's write a test for a publishable product can be published. And we'll say product equals factory products class. Great. And we can do a pre-assertion here. Assert false. Product is published. Some of these tests might become redundant after we do this. Then we can say product publish. And then we can assert true. Product is published. So an interesting thing to keep in mind here is sometimes you have to make a decision about whether you want to make an assertion based on like a method that's exposed on the product. So like checking that it's published by having a method called isPublish. And sometimes you want to assert against the implementation of that. So like you can see here, I'm creating a unpublished product that's publishable, right? I should make this one publishable too. And I should probably actually specify that the published at is blank in this case. But sometimes you might want to make assertions about this column, and sometimes you might want to just rely on this method. I don't think there's really a guaranteed right or wrong here. It just kind of depends on your situation. So I think like I would probably be inclined. I think I would actually probably collapse this test into this one. So this one I drove this out to be able to test my isPublished method before I implemented publish. I think now I would probably combine these tests, but let's just get this written first. So when we create a publishable product, we do want to specify up front that the published at date is null, because that's how we can kind of like see, okay, we're documenting that like this is the reason that it's not published. And then we can publish it and say that, you know, it is published. You might want to make an assertion about this date. I think we could probably do that. It's not terrible. Let's do assert not null product published at. I don't think that's the worst thing I've ever seen. Let's add this publish method. Publish. And all we're going to do here is update the published at timestamp to be a fresh timestamp. And in our tests, we could test that, oh, we're setting the published at timestamp to the current time as soon as we call publish. I think that is irrelevant. I think all that matters right now is that it's not null, because we actually don't care about the time. That's more just like for logging and debugging purposes. So I would rather write this test in terms that won't cause it to fail if we change what timestamp we store here, for example. You know what I mean? Because it just doesn't matter. All we care about is it published or non-published? So let's see if this gets us passing, and it does. So now that that's passing, I think I'm actually going to collapse this down. So here's an interesting tidbit, something that I kind of came up with the other day. A lot of the time I want to test a custom array representation of a model. Like you can see here, I'm testing when I convert this to an array, that this is what I get back, because these are the only fields I currently care about. It's tricky though, because I also want to test that when the product is not published, this says true. And when it's not publishable, this says false or whatever, you know what I mean? And that's annoying, because then you want to basically duplicate all your tests just for checking the array structure. So what I've been doing lately is adding extra assertions like this. So I check that it's published, but then I also convert it to an array and check that the published key is set to true. So I'm like doing my array format assertions every time I'm checking something else, so that all those conditions still get covered, and I know that I'm not just hard coding true into the array, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to kind of port these over. So the array version of published should be false at the beginning. Then after we publish it, the array version of published should be true. And this should pass. No, undefined variable published product. Okay. It should just be product. There's another case where we basically want to verify that an already published product, can't be published, but I don't really know what behavior I want there yet, so I don't want to define it yet, I don't think. It doesn't really have any impact. Like, there's no side effects of publishing. So in this case, it doesn't really matter if we published it twice or anything. Like, we might just let it happen. Who cares? I'll keep this one for now so that we still have the tests that show... Actually, you know what? We don't need that because that gets covered here. All right, this test can go. All right, so we're green there. So let's run this feature test again now and see where we're at. Okay, so the feature test is green. So we've implemented the ability to publish a product in the most naive possible way, using this new controller for creating a new published product, which is cool. We probably want to add a couple other tests. Let's just add them quickly. Maker cannot publish other products. It's kind of the shortest words that I can use to say someone else's product. So let's change this to other user. I'll make, oh, you know what? We should make sure we pass this user ID in here. Whoops. Make sure that's still passing. Okay. So this should belong to another user. If I can only type. And now this should be acting as that user. And this should be acting as the other user. Sorry, same user, but other user's product. Make sure we didn't screw this one up. That's still good. Maker cannot publish other products. So is there, it's probably not an assert failure, but I think 404 is what we want in this case. We don't want to, do we want 404? I think we want 422 because it's not that the endpoint doesn't exist. The endpoint does exist because it doesn't have an ID baked into the endpoint. It's just that the payload doesn't make sense. So let's just assert status 422 and let's assert false that the product's published. Make sure it's still not published. Okay, so now we can update the controller implementation. So we'll change this to auth user products find. This one is failing because we didn't import the auth facade. And now we're calling publish on null. All right, so that's good. So, normally I would do find or fail here, right? Because then we'd automatically get the model not found exception, which would trigger a 404. But because we want a 422, which I think is the right behavior here, I'm having a hard time deciding how I want to handle this. I think we'll do find or fail, but we'll throw it in a try catch and see how it looks. So if we catch a model not found exception here, then we could just basically, we'll return an empty JSON response for now, but we might decide to put like an error message in there eventually. That really, to me, only really matters if I decide to expose that in the UI. The code is really the only thing that I can see my view component caring about, but we'll see. All right, so that's passing. This one is passing. Yeah, we did a podcast last year where we talked about controllers a lot. And it was a really good episode. I think it's the most popular Full Stack Radio episode ever. So definitely check that out if you're interested. Okay, so last one I'd like to do is that a guest cannot publish products. So if we create a publishable product that belongs to someone, we don't really care, and then we try to access it as nobody, what should happen? Should we get a 422? No, we should probably get an unauthorized, right? Like a 401. Is that the right one? I need to get a poster of this printed. Yeah, 401. Okay, and yeah, that seems right. So probably this is going to be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Things are exploding. If we go up here and we stick this, I think probably like here. That should be, I think, enough. We might not be getting a 401, unauthenticated. Okay, so we actually need to do with exception handling. Yeah, because we want the authentication exception or whatever to get converted into a real response. Okay, I think that's enough back-end stuff. We still got to do the other side of this. Actually, you know what? Let's do the other side of it because I think it's interesting. So you remember before I was talking about how we might have ended up adding like a publish action to the controller and then an unpublish action to the controller, right? Well, if we've decided to represent the act of publishing as a store action on the published products controller, what would an unpublish be, right? If we're looking at index, show, create, store, edit, update, delete, well, if we have a dedicated controller for published products and we want to take a published product and convert it to an unpublished product, what we're really doing is like deleting the published product, you know? So we can use a delete request on the published products controller to obviate the need for an unpublish action. So let's implement that. A maker can unpublish their own product. So I'm trying to remember, I have this product factory that lets me create published products. Let's look at our model factory. I guess we could use this still. Yeah, let's just use that. Okay. So we'll create a user and then we'll use the product factory to create a published product. So actually a quick kind of brain dump on what this is all about. A lot of the time I run into situations where like these sorts of factories that don't give me enough. I need something like more kind of complicated than what this supports. So what I end up doing a lot of the time lately is creating these custom factory classes that I've just been sticking directly in database. You can't put them in the factories folder because the auto loading gets messed up in weird ways that I won't get into now. So I just stick them in here, and they're just like basically namespaces for static functions where I can come up with like a nice name for the type of action that I'm trying to do. So this is similar to just like a state published, right? But it's nice because I can pass in this case, you can see I'm saying if I pass in a Stripe account attribute, I want to use that external ID. I could also say, if I want to pass in like a user email attribute, add that to the user. So you can just do like some more complicated things this way, which can be kind of nice. So I've been using this approach lately, and I actually kind of like how this reads anyways. I prefer product factory create published better than factory product class states publishable create. So I think I'm going to move to this approach for a lot of things. Like I might even have like create publishable to replace this. You know what I mean? Yeah, pretty cool. So to unpublish a product, we're going to have a user. We're going to have a published product that belongs to that user. And then acting as that user, we want to make a delete request, right? So is there a delete JSON? Yep. So we want to say delete JSON. And we're not going to pass this through in the body. Instead, we're going to stick it in the URL. So even though the ID that we're passing through here is the ID of the product, not like the published product, because there is no published products table or anything, I still think like this is kind of a clever, clean way to do it. So we're taking our product that we created in the published version of it, that resource, and we're just sending through a delete request. And we want to make sure that that comes back as successful and that the product is no longer published. So not found exception. So let's just stick it in here, kind of shortcut some things a little bit so we can hopefully look at the UI. And we'll add a destroy. And what do we get now? Method destroy does not exist. So let's add a destroy method. And we'll have an ID here. And now we should get another error that it just didn't do what it was supposed to do. So let's just copy this. I don't know what a delete request should typically return, to be honest with you. Should it return a... Let's find out. Let's look at JSONAPI.org. Delete. Deleting resources. Let's return a 204 because I don't want to return anything else. Return response. How does this work? Do we have to pass through an empty string? Yeah. 204. I almost wish we could just do like return response, like no content or something. Didn't mean to close that. Now we're going to get an error that there is no unpublished method, right? No query results. That's interesting. Oh, duh, because this should be the ID from the URL. Okay, so no unpublished method. So let's add that here. And we'll say a published product can be unpublished. So we'll do product factory, create published, and we'll assert true that it's published. Sure. We'll assert true that the array says that it's published. Why not? Then we'll unpublish it, and then we'll assert false that it's published, and we'll assert null on the publish.timestamp. Why not? And we'll assert false here. Nothing to lose by over asserting really in this case. And then we'll add an unpublished method here that basically just does this, sets that to null. And now that's green. That test is green and this test is green. Yeah. So we do need to add more tests. This implementation is like jumping the gun a lot. We don't have basically the same tests that we had in the other case. So let's say a maker cannot unpublish other products. We'll just quickly get this same setup in here. So we'll do this. We'll move this up here. Change this to other user. We'll try to make that delete request. We'll assert status 422, I think. Or 404 is actually fine in this case because the ID is encoded in the URL. And we'll assert true that the product is still published. Okay, so no query results. So this should be with exception handling, since we need to rely on that exception getting converted. So that's good. And a guest cannot unpublish products, period. So this doesn't need anything. We don't want to act as anyone. What should they see? Should they get a 404 because they're not allowed to know if it exists, or should they just get a 401 because they're unauthenticated and you're not even allowed to try and look for this URL? I think 401 is probably fine. Okay, it's green already. Sweet. Okay. Now that that stuff is working, we have 20 minutes before I would normally end this to look at the Vue.js stuff. All right, let's think about this. So let's start with this one, being able to publish it. So I do have like some front-end logic in place to make sure that like if I update this in a way that it's not publishable, you can't publish it. I want to make this a lot better over time and have it like list out why it's not publishable, or maybe highlight other areas in the UI to sort of guide you and let you know what needs to be fixed. But for now, just saying that it can't be published is fine. So let's do this thing. Okay, let's go to our publish toggle components, and we'll have a @click here that says publish. So let's just add that publish method and just kind of verify that things are working in general. Let's make sure that we feel confident that we've got our kind of bearings and that things are working okay. Clicked publish, clicked publish. Okay, that's cool. All right, so I think what we want to do here, let's look at our update webhook settings form, jack some Axios code. So basically what we want to do is we want to try and make a post request to published products, and we're going to need this product ID. Actually, that's just going to be this.product.id. So we're going to pass through a product ID of this.product.id. And I think we will, I usually have this like variable for basically tracking that like the UI is trying to do something, and that I should be showing a loading spinner or something like that. So let's set that up here too. So as soon as this gets clicked, we want working to be set to true to say, hey, the UI is doing some stuff now. No matter what happens, does Axios have a finally? Doesn't seem like it. Okay, so we don't have finally, so we do have to do that in both cases. So everything looks to be, if I'm not mistaken, it's based on this product.published thing. So this is kind of an interesting situation, because normally what I would say that we should do is we should say this dot product.published equals true, right? But product is a prop, so we can't edit the prop. So I'm tempted to say published is equal to this.product.published in our data thing, because if I'm not mistaken, props are run before data is initially computed. So we can use props to seed a data value. And then anywhere where we have product.published, which is like a bunch of places, let's just select all of those. And we'll just change that to published. And we'll just have to fix this one that we overrided. So let's just make sure we didn't break anything. Okay, so this is still a draft. This one's still published, so that's still working as expected. If we look at the publish toggle, published is false, publishable true, published false. So now if we get a successful response back here, we can set this.published equals true. I almost wonder if like a better approach here would be to pass in the product as a seed and then keep track of the whole product state, so that we can replace the product with a new product that comes back from the API. And that'll probably have to happen eventually, but let's not worry about that yet. Okay, so I don't know what's going to happen here yet. Let's just see. publish. Hey, that happened pretty quick. So if we look at getting Git, it is published now, so that's good. And if we look at our network tab, we made a request to publish products. It came back, published, it all worked. So that's sweet. So I feel pretty good about that. So why don't we like make it kind of look cool though? One thing that is hard to do is Valet is so fast that it is annoying to do loading spinners sometimes because you can't even look at them because things happen just too quick. A good hack for that is to either put a set timeout in your JavaScript or just throw a sleep on like the actual in the controller to just basically say, hey, wait 1 second or 2 seconds before running this request so we can see what the loading spinner should look like. So let's try that. So check this out. Let's add another class here called button loading. And let's look at my buttons.less file. Button loading. Okay, so button secondary is a button bordered variant. Okay, so this will probably just actually work. So if while it's working, you know, trying to do some work, we convert this to a loading button, then this should work. Yeah, you could throttle the network, but I find it's more trouble than it's worth. We'll try it both ways. Maybe you guys will convert me. So that's not quite what I wanted, but that's fine. Let's just make it work from the beginning. And just kind of think about why this is busted. So normally you have this loading spinner and things look good because the text is invisible. So you can see I have this oh, maybe I don't have it here. Are all my loading buttons broken? Oh no, so button loading sets the color to transparent, basically the text color, right? So I think what I need to do is also make any children have a color of transparent and make that important too. That seems like the easiest workaround right now. Basically what I want to do is I want to have the button not change size, because that's kind of the most annoying thing that happens. Usually you switch to like a loading spinner and then the button gets smaller, so you have to put like a hard-coded width. So I saw this trick that Bulma uses where it makes the contents of everything invisible, like transparent, so that the text is still there taking up space, so the button stays the right size, but everything gets replaced with the spinner, which is kind of cool. So let's see what we have now. So that's closer to what I want. And we'll also want to disable it. So let's add disabled equals working. So this doesn't appear to be that disabled. Oh, because it's a fucking span. Okay. Do I have an is disabled helper? A lot of time when you can't use a real button for something, or you need to simulate like a hover state or something with a class, I'll often have classes like isActive that I can apply by hand to simulate the look for when something is active. So I use that, for example, when this is clicked, it looks like it's constantly hovered because it's active. So I toggle the isActive class to get that happening. So in this case, I think I want to do an isDisabled helper. We'll probably want to add that to other stuff too. The thing that sucks about this is like we want to say cursor not allowed, which I don't even know if that's right. It might all be supposed to be one word. We'll see. Does this have disabled? Okay. Let's add that class. Is disabled working? We can't actually disable a span. I guess you could probably do a search on that property, but that seems to be fine. Now the problem is click events still happen, right? So I think you can do pointer events none, but if you do pointer events none, I think you lose the cursor. See, now we can't specify the disabled cursor, which is even more annoying. So I'm not going to use pointer events none, and instead I'm just going to add a guard clause to our publish thing, which sucks, but I think that's the... Actually, that's not even the right place to put that. We have to put that in this stupid @click on the button, which is even more annoying. We can just add a method here called toggle. And we'll say if this not working, return. I can't use a real button because I need to use Flexbox to position the icons and stuff inside of it the way that I want and get these things centered nicely. And you can't use Flexbox inside a button element in Safari. So I have to use a fake button for Safari to actually render to even respect the Flexbox stuff. Stupid bug. This.show equals not this.show. All right, let's see where that gets us. Okay, so we got no click thing. Clicking isn't working. It's kind of what we want. And if we disable or set this back to false, wait a tick. Draft. Let's look at the console, make sure nothing weird is happening. Draft, publish, published. We probably also want to hide this thing if it's working. So let's think about how that should work. So here we have vShow equals show. So we could say show and not working. And we could move this to a computed property if we want to. Let's get this published at thing back to null. And just see if that looks cool now. Publish, it goes away, that spins for a bit. Oh, and then it comes back. Grim. Okay, maybe there's a better way to solve this. Instead of saying show and not working, how about when we publish it, we hide it? This.show equals false. That should work too. All right, let's set this back to null. Nice. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's give it over a sleep here, and we'll try the network throttling that is so highly recommended. Okay, so if we go to network, what throttling speed do you normally set it at? In my experience, I usually have to set it to like GPRS for it to even feel slow. So like if I go here now, that's still way faster than the server was. But it's fine. So if we do no throttling, this is one thing that I actually haven't I haven't come up with a solution that I really love for this. I've done some things in the past, but like, so when we click publish, this is going to happen so fast that that loading button never even shows up, right? Which is insane. It almost feels like you don't trust that it worked. So something I've done in the past, which I'm tempted to do again, and maybe we'll do this on another stream, but sometimes what I like to do is basically make this take a minimum amount of time. Like, I want this action to take the minimum of 500 milliseconds or however long the request takes, say, right? So I had a helper for that where I could basically pass a callback in, and it was kind of neat how it worked, if I remember correctly. But basically, it just lets me force the spinner to show up for enough time that you see that I'm trying to show you a spinner, and that it's not just like visual jank. But yeah, it was something like creating a promise.all around a promise that resolves after 500 milliseconds, and then a promise that resolves as soon as this request ended. Anyways, we've been doing this for like an hour. We got like most of the stuff that I wanted to get done. So hopefully that was like a cool, intro to some ways that you can think about creating like pseudo resources in your applications, like published products, even though there's no table or model for that, and how that can kind of give you the opportunity to create new controllers, which lets you keep your regular products controller nice and slim, and then also have this nice slim published products controller. So now we have like a whole controller just for publish and unpublish, and they're both really short. So everything's kind of really easy to find and really easy to understand. You don't have stuff all mixed up. So that's kind of a cool trick that you can use when you're trying to simplify your nasty controller code. A lot of people will be like, oh, we just have a command bus, we should fire commands and stuff. But most of the time you can just like create new controllers for things, and things are simpler and easier that way. And hopefully it was kind of fun diving through some of this view stuff a little bit and putting together, this Axios thing and the loading button and stuff like that. So hopefully that was fun. And leave a comment on the video if you thought it was interesting, or message me on Twitter. And if you're around on Friday, I'll see you on Friday for another stream at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. See you, everybody.